Welcome to Chapter 7, Stress Less. Doesn't that feel good just to hear that? Stress less. That's a life I've been aspiring to live, is a stressless life. Stress-free seems a little bit impossible for most people. Stress and daily stress is just part of being human. So the idea of stressing less is really, really powerful for me. And I talk to my clients about this all the time. And we open this chapter with a beautiful quote from, again, Deepak, one of my teachers. And as you're carrying now what you're learning from each previous chapter forward into the next chapter, I'm hoping that you're weaving together not just the content and the teachings and the science and the psychology, but my goal and hope is that you're starting to weave together what's possible for you. What I mean by that, and I talk about this sometimes in my language, I tell people, they'll say, Yetta, what do you do? And I say, well, I turn people's wounds into wisdom. And they look at me like, what? You're actually learning how to turn your wounds into your wisdom. And there's a quote here that Deepak has, and I've included it because I so resonate with this. He says, the wounding becomes sacred when we are willing to release the old stories and to become the vehicles through which the new story may emerge into in time. We're learning to rewrite the story. We're not changing what happened to you. We're learning to help you to rewrite a story that as a result of what happened, those wounds are now becoming your wisdom. What do I mean by that? You'll learn a whole lot of great stuff in this chapter about stress, but I do want to share something with you as we get started in this chapter. The wounding becoming the wisdom. When I look back and I think about the stories that you've already heard in this book, there's usually at this point in a conversation with a client or in my online group coaching that I do live, where people will say, I can't believe what happened to you. I can't believe what you lived through. The truth is, people have lived through far worse. And my story is just one story. We all have a story. And I didn't realize the stress that the old narrative about my story and my wounds was actually causing me. So when I look back at having to be sat out in the hall, as you've already heard in my book, to be excluded from holiday parties, to be excluded in my own home, to suffer some of the cognitive, the mental, the physical abuse from a very strict disciplinary stepfather, from losing my own biological father and my brother and so many people that I loved in my life, instead of writing the story of the victimization, what I learned was I could write the story of being a victor. I don't get lost in the drama of most of the world because I've literally been trained, my wounding to be taught to sit out in the hallway to watch it all is what is one of my gifts when I'm coaching and teaching with clients. Another one of my woundings of, how I literally was told I was stupid and didn't think I could learn, forced me to dive deeper and to learn even more. I'm really good at synthesizing massive amounts of information in a really short period of time. That's a biological aspect, all of my components of being human, learning to come into play and say, wait a minute. What if all the things that happened to me are actually here to help me help myself and now help others like you? So in this chapter, when we get into some of the tools and techniques on chapter 7, we are going to get back into a little bit of stress statistics. I need to remind you the data sometimes wakes us up. We're going to talk about benefits of reducing stress, which, let's be honest, you already know there's benefits to reducing stress. The question is, why aren't you doing it? Because you have a belief system inside of you somewhere that we need to start to work on. You're figuring that out by now. Then, here's a big one we've got on here in our table of contents, how anger affects our health. And you're going to get into some great awareness around this. Anger in the body, thoughts of anger show up in the cells and tissues. Go all the way back to chapter 3 around harnessing the power of emotions. When anger's in the body, it literally is like acid searing metal. That's how dangerous it is. And so that's why stress is the number one thing that we need to focus on in our physical well-being. Where does anger come from? From our thoughts. That emotion of anger, back up and ask yourself, you're learning by now, where does that come from? It comes by your perception, how you're climbing the ladder of inference, how you're showing up in the world. And when this part of our brain gets taken offline, you immediately go into a stress response and you run on an old script. We've got to stay calm, cool, and in a safe space if we want to call forth the new beliefs and the new behaviors we've been working on so far. And then when I look at the last thing, there are some anger management techniques that we're going to visit in this chapter. Anger management is a word that I kind of go back and forth on. We're not managing anger, really. We're waking you up to figure out what is anger, where does it show up. I don't want you to think of management like you just package it up and put it over in a box in a corner. I want you to think of anger management of how do I learn to work with the emotion of anger to show me and teach me how to go back and possibly look at the perspective differently so I could write a new story. So lots of great stuff happening here in chapter 7, a lot of worksheets. There is a phenomenal TED Talk by Kelly McGonigal called How to Make Stress Your Friend. Did you know you could actually make stress be your friend? Really great worksheets. And, as I just kind of look through here, lots of great images and stories. But I, again, want to remind you, don't forget there's a client testimonial in here in the Voices of Mindfulness. I have another client. And this client is, one who, when I first met him, was he radically stressed out. It changed his life drastically to learn to shut up and sit. He did the work. His testimonial is in here. And there's a lot of worksheet space and poems as usual to take you in and out of the right and left brain. But the worksheets, particularly at the end of this chapter, remember, you can use them and you can keep reusing them. So when anger shows up, instead of numbing it, shaming it, pushing it away, running from it, or trying to get away from it and letting it stress you out, with mindfulness, we shut up and sit. We learn to be with the stress. We learn to ask the stress questions. We learn to ask the inner critic and thoughts, what do you need right now? What do you most want? Instead of trying to get away from it, we want to lean in and try to work with it and to listen to it. So there's some great stuff. I say that in every chapter, but of course there is, because for me, this was life-changing work. And I've seen the life-changing work it's made for me to keep my emotions cool, calm, to keep me much less stressed in my life. I've seen all the clients that I work with manage their stress levels by learning this content, and you're going to be able to do the same thing. I'm excited to help you with stress, but I'm even more excited to tee you up that in the next chapter, in chapter 8, we're going to start moving into how to take all these chapters together to understand habits and patterns and teach you how to start to really consciously create new habits. So I'll see you over in chapter 8.